Welcome to another episode of We Are Carbon. I'm Helen Fisher and I'm joined by Sarah Spencer for a discussion that considers how our connection to nature can have a profound positive impact throughout all areas of our lives. It's easy for us to romanticise the idea of listening to the birds or dipping our toes into a glistening stream, as though experiencing nature might be an infrequent luxury to try and carve time out for. But this talk helps us to recognise that the role of nature in our lives is far more encompassing, and despite our built-up environments and scheduled routines, we are all part of nature, to such a degree that when we introduce aspects that are inspired by nature, or even start to think like nature, then we can enjoy much greater success within everything, from our health, our relationships and our businesses. Think Like a Tree encompasses Sarah's work as a trainer and author and draws upon the principles of nature to support people and organisations in a tangible way for meeting their unique needs. It's ever evolving and adapting through a growing network of facilitators who are each paving their own path for incorporating a more nature-connected approach to a diverse range of situations. It's beautiful how these principles can have a place in each of our lives, and I hope you enjoy listening through to consider this all through your own personal lens. New episodes of this podcast are added every other Tuesday, and they're available in both video and audio-only formats. Find them on YouTube and your favourite podcasting platform. And don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date. Right, let's get stuck in. Hi Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time out, and it would be great if you could kick us off by maybe just a bit of an introduction to yourself and also your work with Think Like a Tree.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on your We Are Carbon podcast, which I think is an absolutely fantastic name and a fantastic idea as well. So I founded Think Like a Tree 5 years ago, and really it came out of a culmination of lots of different ideas and research and reading and studies that I'd been doing. In particular, sort of came out of my permaculture journey. So I had studied permaculture. We live in the National Forest here in South Derbyshire, and I studied permaculture really as a way of designing the land. But then the deeper I got into this kind of design process, which is brings in natural living systems principles, the more I realised that it can be used for people, organisations, social situations, etc. So I got more and more into that direction. And so Think Like a Tree was, is really my response at thinking, how can we bring living systems principles, so, the secrets of nature's success, and apply them to our own lives as individuals for things like health, well-being, and how to live as a good person on this world, on this planet, but also for organizations and businesses to again have a model that really has been tried and tested over 3.8 billion years and is really the only operating system that's ever been proved to be resilient on planet Earth. And also, to shift away from some of the current paradigms that we're all living in. So these sort of mindsets that show up in the actions that destroy the ecosystems and lead to mental health crises. So it's really, a combination of lots of different disciplines. So not just permaculture, but things like regenerative economics, regenerative business, biomimicry. We can see over and over again that there are living systems that are in these disciplines that we can draw together. And my aim with Think Like a Tree is to try and bring that to a wider audience. I hope that made sense.
It absolutely does. I'm really very interested in this idea of expanding upon that permaculture starting point. It obviously started as something on the land, but a lot of people do integrate that, and it's just a natural course of action to see, well, where do these principles apply elsewhere in our lives and in organizations, or in even designing for an entire community or a city, or what can we do with that, because it's so just at the heart of it, it can be so integral to the way that things run in a circular economy and this kind of regenerative ideas and mindset.
On that, I think that the path from permaculturist to applying living systems design process and principles to people, that's a well-trodden path. So I'm hugely inspired by people like Luby McNamara, for example, who wrote People and Permaculture, and her cultural emergence work as well. But what I realized as well is there are so many people out there who either have no interest in gardening or growing, and we don't all need to be smallholders, gardeners, or growers. And in fact, we can't all be. So what's the route to accessing this sort of vast bank of wisdom for people who aren't interested in growing, but are deeply interested in nature and being inspired by nature? So, I would say that, a certain percentage of my course participants or clients have some familiarity in with permaculture, but I would say the vast majority don't. And I think that that's where what gets me really excited is actually bringing these living systems ideas to audiences who wouldn't have otherwise engaged with them. And that's hugely rewarding for me, and then for them as well. So I have a lot of people who come who maybe have a health background, or who've done some forest bathing training, or have children that they're supporting. And so bringing to these wider audiences is really hugely exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get stuck in as well and get some more details about the work itself. But before we go really deep into that, if it's not sort of too personal, I'd love to learn more about your own integration of the ideas of working with nature to support you through your chronic illness. That was something that occurred, and sounds like it was quite an inspiration in your life. So if you could maybe share a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I have a lifelong chronic illness which has had various flare-ups. It's a genetic related illness, and it's had various flare-ups at different times of my life. And it has really, impacted the direction that I've gone in. But I feel like that's been in a really positive way. So, it's used it as a source of wisdom, and, other people are interested in that as well. And obviously it gives me a huge amount of empathy for anybody else also living with a chronic illness. And originally my plan was to do a more kind of land-based permaculture consultancy and design. And I was also trained as a forest school leader, so I worked with children for a while with forest school, and also doing eco schools, so bringing permaculture ideas really to children. But all of that is very, much more energy intensive, and really my health wasn't really compatible. And back in 2015, I had a huge health crash, which left me in bed really for about 18 months. And at the time, I didn't have a diagnosis, so it was hugely problematic. But I had I was already on the permaculture diploma journey, so that you start off in permaculture with a permaculture design certificate course, which is quite an in-depth course, but then you build on that in a diploma. And in this diploma, you have to build up 10 different designs. And I started very firmly with land-based designs for my own small holding, but also for a community woodland social enterprise that I co-founded called Whistlewood Common. But then gradually what I realized, I mean, I just after about a year of being in bed, and at times I could hardly stand upright. I was so dizzy, and, a lot of really all of my autonomic nervous system functions were totally dysregulated. So even basic things like breathing and heart rate and temperature regulation, they were all totally all over the place. And after about a year, I was so fed up, as you can imagine, that I just made a decision. And I remember the date. It was the 6th of April, 2016. And I just said, right, I'm going to design my way back to health. So I took the permaculture tools, and then a huge amount of wider reading around nature-inspired disciplines, and did exactly that, sort of literally put pen to paper and designed a road back to health. And of course, that drew in lots of different medical interventions and complementary therapies, but I think one of the things that has made the most profound difference is actually the natural principles, that permaculture has a set of natural principles, and then I sort of built on them and drew principles from other disciplines as well, and really kind of reworded them and reframed them for individual well-being and health. And of course, this had had a huge impact on my mental health as well. So, psychologically, and also the illness that I have does have a neurological component where, in your worst phases, brain function goes all foggy and things like that. So what I found was these natural principles were really hugely helpful for my health and well-being, and also to be able to sort of manage my energy so that I could really engage in that deep healing that was needed to sort of get me back, to a position of being able to function in any meaningful way. And then, over the last however many years, that is now 6-7 years, I've built on that, and now really am able to, work in what other people would consider a pretty normal way. But of course, behind that, there's a deep sense of knowing what's right for me. So what I also did along the way was drew these natural principles together, created a program called the Think Like a Tree program, and then building on that, wrote the book Think Like a Tree: The Natural Principles Guide to Life, where I drew together somewhere around 42 natural principles, put them in categories, and then just gave some examples of where we might see them in nature, and what people can learn from them for their own lives. So for me personally, the energy natural principles have been absolutely huge. So nature doesn't really waste energy, but nature doesn't do perfection either. Nature doesn't do straight lines. So we can go with the flow, we can embrace that complexity. And then other principles that have been hugely helpful are around rest and pause, and actually being able to transform those sort of feelings of feeling lazy or guilty when you take time for self-care, to actually totally transform that, to see that rest and pause time as really productive. So either setting you up for future, it's like dormancy, a forest in winter, and then sets itself up for that burst of energy in spring. But we don't call a forest lazy, do we? So why do we put those labels on ourselves or on other people? So those types of things have really, really helped me in my own well-being journey. And then, of course, this is all relevant to not just health, not just mental health and well-being, but also, every aspect of our lives, our businesses, our economies, etc.
Yeah, no, that's really, I think, something that so many people would empathise with you with regards to the chronic illness, the endless fatigue, and then that building up, like you say, it's affecting then your mental well-being, because you've got that sense that you should be getting on, or you want to be getting on with things, but your body is telling you to do otherwise. And I think along with empathizing with that, a lot of people are struggling with that. A lot of people would relate to it directly in a way that this is so relevant to them. To hear what you've got to say on this. And I suppose the ideas that you've touched upon there, the principles of rest and of going with the flow, that all is something that the structure of our societies has detached us from. So the idea that actually you just say, well, I'm not going to feel guilty about it, I need a rest, and that then in turn will propel me with more energy and achieve more because I've taken that rest. But people don't always have the space in their lives for that. So I suppose that's really, it's quite inspirational to hear that that's taken you from a place of feeling like you're going in one direction, and it's turned things around. And like you say, you could work in a normal way. You would just sort of consider that to be quite a normal routine that you can engage with. How much do you associate those principles within that healing journey? Do you consider them to be very integral for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I think the really great thing about them is that anybody can go out and have a walk in their local park, or, their local nearby nature, and they're right there in front of you. If you see a dandelion pushing up through the cracks in a city pavement, you've got a really inspiring example of resilience. So what I really wanted to ensure when putting these principles, the book and the courses together, was that these were really, really accessible for people to learn from themselves. So this is not some, academic exercise where we're just thinking up ideas. I mean, there are plenty of psychology books that have people just make things up. And they don't fit that living systems paradigm. But I wanted not only to show how living systems work, but also to allow people to access and learn from nature directly. So, this is my book of principles is not some definitive, Bible of principles. This is just a starting point for people to have those light bulb moments, or that, those moments of enlightenment themselves out within nature. But it doesn't have to be go out into the wilderness or some, forest, remote forest or whatever. These things are all around us. And of course, the most important thing to remember, of course, is that we are living systems ourselves. So we are nature. And so, one of the fundamental elements of Think Like a Tree is for people to reconnect with that part of themselves that sees themselves as part of the living world. And, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about the systems that we're living in, because we're living in, according to a paradigm that's really out of date. It's actually a paradigm that's only been around for maybe 500-600 years, of this sort of mechanistic reductionist. So seeing people and businesses and organizations and societies as machines, and we're just cogs in that. It's just totally wrong. So if we shift that paradigm to seeing ourselves as part of living systems, then hopefully, those systems will start to change to reflect that as well. So you're right, when we feel guilty or feel lazy because we are, because we're ill, that's nothing to do with being ill. That's to do with the mindset that we're raised in. And too often, I think personal development methodologies blame the individual and say, if you make the decision to do this, things will change. Totally ignoring that systemic context that actually, we're all raised in a system that encourages us to, be always on, be always answering our emails, being, not saying no to things, feeling guilty. So we have to, the natural principles view is to look at the big picture. So to look at the systems, not just look at the individuals. So, when people come on our courses, they're encouraged to see, look inside themselves, but also very much to look at we take a sort of tree ring approach, that concentric circles that you often see in it repeated across the living world. That we look at ourselves just as part of other systems, and that we can see ourselves as an ecosystem, and then build on that to then have wider influence, but not forgetting the context of the systems that we're living within.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting something you touched on there regarding we haven't lived this way for a very long time. That's difficult to understand in the context of our short lifetimes, and even maybe the sort of generations we can relate to previously, but maybe like you suggested 600 years of mechanistic thinking. It's in the scheme of things very short in the evolution of who we are and how we connect to the world. We can be of the mind that this is the right way to do things, and progress has moved us towards this because that's good. Progress is good, but I think it feels like it's more inherent, more natural, more healing to look towards how we connect with nature rather than how we detach ourselves from it. The idea that you've taken these living systems and taken that inspiration from all manner of different contexts, different ways of looking at it, different inspirations that you have found. And I think you said 42 maybe principles that you've touched on, which is clearly just a baseline of then that kind of can lead on to any other way of interpreting them. These can be integrated into our lives in all manner of different ways and for all different reasons. So you've given us some examples for your own healthcare journey and how that can support both the body and the mental health. And I think what would be really interesting, because we can't possibly discuss the whole scope of them, we can see how everything is connected and all of the direction that you're coming from with this. But perhaps you could offer us a couple of specific examples, maybe a couple of very different examples of how you might take one of those principles and apply it to a given situation.
Yeah, so I'm thinking in the resilience principles category, there's a principle that says each important need should be supported by several different elements or strategies. This is taken or slightly reworded from a permaculture principle, but if you look at a tree's need for water, for example, it doesn't just get water from one particular source or have it in one particular way. So it'll have shallow roots to get that surface water as it falls. It'll angle its leaves or capture water on its leaves to slow the flow down. It will have a deep tap root that can access water from the water table, for example, and obviously different trees in different physical locations have created and evolved different strategies. So the baobab tree will expand its trunk and contract to holding water in it. So you've got all these different strategies for just meeting that single need, which obviously is a fundamentally important need of a tree, which is water. And the same principle can be applied to, say, business. A business. If we've got a particular need for income generation, for example, in a business. Now, obviously, what we hope that we're doing when we're moving towards evolving businesses is actually having income not as the primary reason for that business existing. So the primary reason will be some kind of purpose and vision, whether that be a not-for-profit or a for-profit. And we're seeing that in the evolution of, for example, B Corps, where they actually have written in their purpose into their legal documents. But nevertheless, businesses almost certainly need some income, and to have a more diverse strands of income can lead to greater resilience. So we can see that, for example, with artists and art businesses, that they'll have different types of art which will be aimed at different audiences and different income levels. They'll also have maybe teaching income as well. And so we certainly saw that in COVID, when COVID hit, that people who had this more diversity of different strands of income, and that when one fell away, then others could come in and fill that void. So I always advise businesses to look for that diversification in income to complement, and that is directly a living systems principle.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I can see how that not only you can take that then to the whole economy or a community and say that obviously in terms of COVID, we saw that reflect in so many different ways, whether it was the individual business or the entire of a country having cut off from supply of export, imports, that kind of thing. They were meeting the needs of the people through one solution as opposed to many. And then I can also see how the principles connect into one another, because you've just described this principle of resilience and meeting the need in numerous ways. But then you also touched upon earlier the idea that nature doesn't need perfection, doesn't strive for perfection. And they seem to interlink, because I suppose our human need for perfection would be around the idea that if there's only one solution, then you've got to get that right, because that puts a pressure on that solution to get it perfect. Whereas if that just lets itself down a little bit at some point, but it's being held up by all of these other diverse means to support that need, maybe we don't feel so obsessed with creating perfection. So I think there's definitely a whole kind of exploration of all these principles. It seems quite exciting to me that you've created 42. That kind of is blowing my mind a little bit of to see those written down and have a look at how they all interlink. That's really fabulous.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that when we're looking at any natural principles or any nature inspired framework, this is just one of many that exist out there, is that we remember the everything is connected natural principle, which is fundamental to all of it. So I do really find that when I take people on a journey of zooming out to see that big picture, to see the connections and to see what's really important, and we do that as in various different ways. We do that in terms of visioning exercise. We do that in terms of being really encouraging people's creativity and coming up with ideas and inspiration, with the idea that there are no wrong answers, because that's how nature does it. There's a huge amount of trial and error, this sort of action learning. Let's do something. Let's try it. Let's see what works. Let's modify it, and then let's go again. But you have to leave room in there for like you say, realizing that no idea or answer or solution is ever perfect. But you have to leave room for errors, and that this process is going to be messy, and that we have to let go of controlling every aspect of it. And so therefore, when we're being guided in this new, which is essentially, a paradigm shift, a whole mindset shift, a new way of thinking and being, we we have to uh, step into that discomfort. We have to let go of this controlling mindset that's been around for so long, and this failure mindset, really. So this idea that we can control everything leads to the failure mindset, because if you realize that you can't control everything, and we can't control anything anyway, it's only an illusion. You know, when we realize that we can't control everything, and we can just influence things and embrace that messiness, really, is hugely liberating. It's hugely empowering, because suddenly anything's possible, because you're going to be rewarded for just doing stuff, rather than being rewarded for if some abstract thing says that it's a success or not. So this is an initial discomfort, but once you move through that discomfort, it's got huge personal and, frankly, economic rewards. So when we're talking about businesses and individuals gaining income, that the innovation that unleashes within an organization, that ability to see every individual, not just the people that are in certain job roles, as important, as innovators, as creative, then we unleash a huge amount of potential in our organizations and in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that, definitely how big that can be. Just that liberation, as you've called it. It feels like it's in such stark contrast to the way that we teach our children right from the very beginning, through our education system, through the employment system. The fear of failure, and then the guilt of not being able to meet your goals on time, that those kind of ideas are drilled into us. So this shift in mindset, do you consider it to have a growing relevance today? And if you do, why do you think that is?
I think it's always been relevant and needed, but I think the one of the reasons that it's gaining ground right now is because it's so obvious that the current methods and systems and mindsets and paradigms have failed. It's so obvious that a heating planet is caused by human action, is a huge failure of the mindsets that underpin that. The same with ecological destruction, and just seeing other living beings as a resource to use, and our language reflects that. Natural capital and natural resources, and that kind of language. So I think that it's always been needed, and if we'd have if we hadn't shifted all those hundreds of years ago, or had shifted back a bit quicker, then we wouldn't be in the mess so much as we are now. But but one of the things about humans is it's very difficult to turn those paradigms around. But when you do, things can happen really quickly. And so I'm always I'm always an optimist, really, because for me, it seems really clear and really obvious. And if we could have those shifts, the actions follow. So, and what we do is we unleash the potential of billions of people to be a force for good. This is one of the reasons I like the idea of regenerative rather than sustainability. So I don't, I never really felt very comfortable with the term sustainability, and I know that a lot of other people feel the same, and I couldn't put my finger on quite why, because essentially I was an environmentalist, and I was doing all of this stuff for really pretty much all of my life. But the term regenerative is all about creating life. It's like creating life, creating the conditions conducive to life, as Janine Benyus the founder of Biomimicry Institute, said. And creating life is so much more exciting than sustainability, which is all about, it evokes that emotion of, oh, what do I have to give up? Or, this is all about having less. Or on the other hand, it might be about sustaining something that I actually don't want to sustain at all. I don't want to sustain the mental health crises that we're in. I don't want to sustain the ecological destruction and the climate crisis. So what are we sustaining? Whereas regenerating life is something that all living beings do and have an urge to do, and that includes humans. And we find that incredibly exciting and empowering, as long as, and this is the big if, we can create the systems that allow and empower individual people and collectively to do that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I've never liked the word sustainable, and the language within this space is difficult because, on the one hand, you're trying to use words that people associate with the sort of the group of work that you're encompassing, but on the other hand, those associations aren't accurate, or they're not what you're 100% working towards. And I like that idea of what you've identified there. Sustainable says we're going to keep things the same. How can we best keep things the same and maintain what we already have, which is not inspiring? And it often includes, how can I restrict myself? How can I go without? Whereas regenerative, it's all about creation. It's all about saying, how can we move forward abundantly to me? And that's stark contrast. And I think that regenerative, in my mind, that is what nature teaches us. Sustainable is kind of more of a human mechanistic thought pattern of how can we make this resource continue to be in use. To some people that difference might be subtle, but I think once you sort of encompass the mindset of it, it just feels huge.
Yeah, it is huge, and it also encourages us to step into that inner journey as well, which I think sustainability doesn't in the same way. Because if we're talking about creating life, that's an inherently kind of heart-based thing. And traditionally, I think that business, and individuals as well, to a certain extent, have been really afraid to step into that sort of heart space. It's all about how can we think our way out of that problem, whereas regenerative is, combines the head, heart, and hands really, and it values the inner journey as much as the outer action. And so it encourages us to look at things qualitatively rather than just having things that we can quantify. Because sustainability, we can quantify, yes, we've reduced X amount of carbon in our business, or we've planted X amount of trees. And that's, those things, and there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just, it's stuck in that mechanistic quantitative thinking. Whereas actually, if you, as a business owner, take your, the people in your business, your team, on an inner journey to spark their innovation and to become more creative at creating life and expanding and growing your business in a healthy way, then that's less quantifiable. There may be some things that will come out of it, like your bottom line is likely to grow, but there are a huge amount of other things that that employee then goes back to their family with a new way of living and a new happiness really, and being inspired, because humans have got that kind of innate drive to create, to be part of something. And it seems to me that in a huge amount of businesses that is just absolutely squashed, and then business owners wonder why people are silently quitting and all these new phrases. Um, well, yeah, that's because of the really that this sort of this whole paradigm that businesses are operating in.
Yeah, I think it brings to mind the idea that we take business too seriously. And in that need for control, we like the predictability. So this is the uniform, this is the suit, this is the expectation, this is what you do to achieve this outcome, and that's predictable. And that takes away the idea that actually inherently being human, it's the passion that drives us, the engagement, the excitement, the fun, the colour. And if you've got a workforce that you can somehow integrate that passion and drive in the individuals into the same objective that the company as a whole requires, then you would think, well, that one's going to leap forward. But it's certainly not going to be predictable, and it's certainly not going to be the same journey as what you could replicate in another circumstance. And so, yeah, the sense of austere seriousness, that is what business equals, and that's because life is about meeting a monetary need. And I think that maybe that whole that paradigm of that is holding us back really from the growth that we could achieve.
Absolutely, and it's by no means a problem of profit driven businesses. So that in charities, for example, and public, I mean, look at the NHS. I have a huge amount of people come on my courses who are burned out health workers, GPs, nurses, midwives, across the board. So this is an organisation that is inherently purpose driven and does amazing things for patients. And I massively love the NHS. I obviously am a frequent flyer in the sense of have used the NHS a lot over my lifetime with living with a chronic illness. But in terms of that holistic, whole systems view of it may well be good for the patients, but what about the people that are working within that organization? And this is true for many charities as well. They've got this great mission and vision, but actually it's not reflected in the day-to-day working practices or the systems really that the individual team members are operating in. And there's a great example of an alternative, which is Buurtzorg, which is started in the Netherlands, but actually is now in many other countries, which is a local community care company. It's actually privately owned, but it took this regenerative approach. So it has small teams that are organised around particular locations and particular groups of clients, and that clients that are in the community. And every time that a team of 6 reaches a team of 12, it splits into another team of 6. So it's like that evolutionary sort of cell multiplication model. But then they have very strong central mentoring and information that these teams can access, but essentially they're self-organizing. So there's very, very little management. There are lots of coaches and mentors, but there are very few actual management functions. So things like schedules and dishing up who's going to see which client, it's all done in that local team level who are responsible for that particular location. And they develop these connections with other local organizations, with the family members, with other providers, to create this really, really strong support structure around the client in the community. So we can see this sort of, one of the characteristics is decentralization. But of course, what that does is it unleashes a real potential in the local teams by empowering them to find the solutions that are right for their particular client and their particular location, because all locations are different. And that joined up approach, collaborative approach, is something that we see over and over again repeated in nature. So, it's something that we really do need to learn from, rather than having this sort of competitiveness mindset that somehow if somebody else is offering a similar product, then they're our competitor. Well, maybe we can talk about how we can strengthen connections and then complement each other, for example.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to hear about different examples of how these principles can be incorporated and are being incorporated into organisations. It's very inspiring because that gives us a model to incorporate into our own work potentially that we know we've got a bit of guidance there for. Your work started off very much focused on the personal side of things, and then it's evolved and now it includes personal and business and organisation. So was that in itself organic? Did you recognise a need for these principles in business?
Yes, I mean, right from the start, I could see that these principles could be applied across all different disciplines, and I've used them as well within a community setting. So I used them in a community woodland social enterprise, Whistlewood Common, that I co-founded back in 2013. So I had been using these principles in an organisational context. So when we took over the land, which is 10 acres of land, is Whistlewood, then I was the lead permaculture designer for the project for the land, but we also used permaculture design to design the organisation and this organisational structures as well. So having this sort of circles approach of different teams empowered to do, to take on different roles. And so I had used it in an organisational context. And then the think like a tree became a network relatively quickly. So other people came on board and wanted to train up as facilitators. And a couple of those facilitators were really interested in business in particular. And J.K. McQuinn, who is a coach for businesses, and she does a lot of workplace wellbeing and leadership coaching. She and I sat down and said, right, okay, let's take this business idea forwards. So it's developed organically in a way out of that mycelial network, which is our Think Like a Tree network of facilitators. And what I love about it is that the network is based around the idea of the mycelial connections in a forest. So I consider myself to be like the hub tree, or some people call it a mother tree, although I don't particularly like gendering nature in that way. And then, so I see myself as having that supportive role, rather than, the traditional top down. I could have chosen other business models so that I had control, but no, wanted it to be able to evolve organically. So each facilitator has their own business, and then really can take the ideas and the principles in whichever direction they're sort of moved to do. So JK and I then started working on an offering for organisations and businesses, and of course, what we draw on there is much wider than permaculture, for example. So there is a huge body of work around regenerative economics, regenerative business, both in the UK and the US and around the world. And of course, we also draw on things like Indigenous wisdom, because it's really heartening to see that with the rise of these regenerative disciplines, that there's that recognition, and this is happening in permaculture as well, that actually we are we are drawing on essentially indigenous wisdom that is being interpreted in different forms. So, to say that humans moved away from this, well, actually, it was only some humans. It was only, that Western European based mindset. And actually, there are indigenous peoples around the world that have been using living systems principles that are much less destructive. And one of my favorite books is Braiding Sweetgrass, which by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So for an indigenous slash scientific perspective, because she is a scientist as well, that's hugely sort of enlightening for me as somebody with no direct experience of that, to have such voices sort of inform the work. I think is deeply important as well.
Yeah, it's that there's so much scope to all of this, isn't there? Because you start with these principles and then they apply to many different people in many different circumstances. And then you take that into an organization or a community, and that's then a web of different integrations of all these different people. So you have developed a network of facilitators, as you've mentioned, and then they presumably are teaching in their own way and their own style. Have you maybe something we could sort of explore a little bit is the uniqueness of their different journeys?
Yes, and they're all different. I mean, I've got people from all sorts of backgrounds in the network, and it's just so wonderful when that it's always exciting for me to have new people come in and then they bring their own perspectives and ideas and enthusiasm. So, for example, one person in the network was a midwife for many years and had to retire on ill health grounds. And she came to me about 5 years ago and did the Think Like a Tree program to really design a new way forward after this sort of enforced retirement. And she wanted to do something business wise, but really wanted to stay well away from midwifery and that kind of background. And so over the last 5 years has developed up new businesses with Nature Connection. And then now she's come on board as trained up last year as a facilitator. And what she's found through engaging with this design process that we use within Think Like a Tree. So what we have within Think Like a Tree program and also the business programs as well is a design cycle. So this is basically allows people. So let's take one step back again. When you embrace these regenerative nature inspired approaches, you need to be looking at the big picture. But our brains want to find patterns. We want to make meaning out of things. So what I've tried to do with what I offer with the programs and to a certain extent in the book as well, is allow people to access that holistic joined up wisdom in more of a sort of step-by-step approach. So the design cycle that we use is step-by-step, but then we can use that to see the big picture, if that makes sense. So through this process, and this person has gone through it several times, then she realized that actually her midwifery, whereas previously she'd seen it as a source of stress, really frankly, she saw that as a source of unique skills and talent, and is now developing a program for expectant parents. I think like a tree inspired program for expectant parents. So this, bringing the natural principles to people at that stage of life that we know actually is really crucial, both in terms of nurturing the next generation, but also often people, and before they become parents. So the research shows that nature connectedness sort of ebbs and flows throughout our lives. So it goes way down in teenage years and comes back sort of in the 20s, and then certainly when people become parents, they seem to become much more nature connected, and then they start thinking about what's this kind of future that I want for my family. So this facilitator was, she really wants to get to people at that stage that's so influential in terms of the future generations of change makers and people. So that is just wonderful to see how a past career can be built upon to create something really magical, sort of in combination with the think like a tree sort of and natural principles.
That's a fabulous example. You can really feel the importance of that work. That body of work is going to become so valuable to people at such a milestone in their lives. And
I think it reflects, very much that sort of inner outer journey as well that we support people to go on. So, that idea of often when we're facing a new phase of life, or we're forced to through illness or whatever, then there's that real urge just to throw out everything that's gone before and let's start something new. And we see this on a global scale, or even in gardening, with this idea that we dig up the soil, we plough vast areas and then we sow new crops. That's industrial agriculture. That's not nature. That's not how nature does things. Nature doesn't plough up the soil unnecessarily. We sometimes get things like forest fires, or we get, herds of pigs going through, for example, churning up ground. But largely, the ground conditions stay stable because that is the most resilient form for nature to build on. So this inner journey reflects that, really, that we can build on past experiences, however happy or unhappy or uncomfortable they've been. Similarly with me and my own illness, building on that. Then, we see these as resources to be built on, rather than things to feel that we've got to just move on from.
yeah, that's great. In terms of, we've touched on the language of sustainability and how that it's challenging, isn't it, to really speak and express the work that you're doing when we have this need within business and big organizations even to take on a sustainable model and to meet certain criteria, which is perhaps considerably more prescriptive than what your work encompasses. So I wonder if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on the types of organisations, or perhaps the people within organisations that your work is particularly well suited to, as opposed to sort of sustainable business on the whole.
Yes, I mean, it can be used at businesses at all scale, because it can be used, say in a team of a large business. But, I really enjoy working with small and medium-sized organisations. And for me, the organisational structure is not important, because, we whether it's private sector or charity or not for profit, then everybody's got something to learn from this approach. And there is a significant overlap. So basically what we provide for people are frameworks, and there are new ways of thinking, but frameworks to actually work through, inspired by living system strands. So we in our organizational work, we use ecosystem strands rather than those natural principles. We do bring in natural principles, but these ecosystem strands are essentially, when you're looking at a business or an organization, it is an ecosystem. So these strands are just a different way of wording or accessing, the same information, but we provide frameworks, and those allow this innovative creativity to emerge. It's different ways of leaders and their teams working together, different collaborative approaches, different ways of like I say, unleashing that creativity, shifting culture, engaging every organization, every individual within the organization, and also work on what is it, what is the one of the principles is around valuing diversity. So every changing system so that every individual can bring what is their unique. Carol Sanford calls this, who's written lots of books on regenerative business. She calls this their essence. You know, what is unique about that individual that they can bring to creating life within the whole of that organization. So we do a lot of work around this. But essentially, what these frameworks also allow organizations to do is bring in any existing frameworks that they want to access. So it could be, you know, carbon reduction. We work with the sustainable development goals. We work with donor economics, for example. So these can all be brought into these overall frameworks that we work within. So it's got a unique flexibility. So it can apply to absolutely any organization, that they can learn from these ecosystem strands and apply this design cycle. But essentially, they're then bringing in any tools or methodologies that they feel appropriate, or maybe they're already working within.
Yeah. I think that something that sort of really ties it all together, you've said that valuing of diversity, and that, to me, the magic of nature, this ability for nature to continually create in these ways that are actually difficult for us to dissect and understand, almost, because there's so much going on there, so much symbiosis. The defining kind of core of all of that is that valuing of diversity, the idea that there are unique roles to such a degree that there's waste from one creature is valuable to another creature, and therefore the uniqueness creates the cycling, and that's very much opposed to what we're used to. We have more of a sense of valuing very specific roles in society, very specific skills, so that people have this aspiration to be the same. And so I love that what you've described there is the business ecosystem recognizes that, kind of drawing all of that in. And does that work? Are there ways to make that work in a group setting where we can value the differences between people as their core contribution?
Yes, I think any group setting can really, really benefit from these tools and this mindset shift, really, of valuing diversity. And it's about creating ways of working, really, whereby that people are given a voice, and people are acknowledged. I mean, how many times in meetings, or maybe when we go to conferences or things like that, the people in the audience or in the room are not even acknowledged that they're there, really. They're just considered to be like passive. And I know, you know, when I'm at a meeting and I look around and I hear a speaker. So I was at a business conference recently, and it was only small, and the breakout workshops were essentially monologues from so-called experts. And this was a business organization that was for businesses that wanting to do good in the world. So this was you know, not profit focused, and it really struck me that we had so much wisdom in the room that just wasn't being harnessed. Now, I know that in conferences time is short, but you know, there are some really creative solutions, for example, about creating communities around that, about you know, about having workshops that are participatory, having meeting check-ins, for example, where you know, you just check in with everybody that's in a team meeting, sort of, how are you? it acknowledges the humanity really of the people, rather than seeing them as just like, what work are you doing and what have you got to do. We need people to be bringing their whole humanity to work. And so just subtle changes to start with around acknowledging the value and the potential. So it's not just about identifying what people can do now. It's about seeing that every individual has a potential, that if we support them, that they will then, be able to unleash around this focus. And that's also where cross-disciplinary teams really, really help as well. So, we get people from across business areas focused around a particular customer base, or that kind of focus, and then are allowed to bring forward ideas, or encouraged to bring forward ideas, but again letting go of that sort of failure mindset, really, because it's you'd think in a way that employees who are unhappy would be really happy given this extra sort of power. But there's this real fear around, well, okay, so they're asking me for these ideas. If it goes wrong, I'm going to get the sack, or I'm going to get penalized in some way. So it needs to be a whole holistic view around that whole shift towards this more innovative, collaborative way of working.
Yeah, I suppose there's an awful lot to be taken on board, so gradual change is the most comfortable.
Yeah, that's it. And the interesting thing is that when you encourage people to step into this new way of thinking, actually, what can seem like small changes can actually unleash really big potential. So yes, we have to step into some discomfort, but we're certainly not talking about ripping everything up and starting again. Bringing in these changes can be quite fundamental to actually the way that an organisation works, but also, if money's a factor, their profitability and their customer satisfaction, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's all interlinked. So this has been a fantastic opportunity. I really have enjoyed speaking with you, and I think if we could maybe just some final words would be really useful, because it's so integral to all different people at all different times of their lives. Maybe you could summarize the different stepping stones that people can take to get involved.
Yes, absolutely. So the starting point for individuals, and this is also relevant to what we call solopreneurs. So people who essentially working on their own, like coaches, for example. Then the Think Like a Tree program is the place to start, and that is usually online. It's over 6 weeks. We also do a 3-day intensive, which is you come to lovely Derbyshire and stay for 3 days. We've got one course coming up in August this year, and then you work through this 12-stage design cycle with bringing in the natural principles. And the focus is some aspect of your life. So whether that be to do with your own sort of business, if like I say, if you're a solo business, or whether that be supporting children, health, well-being, planning retirement, career change ideas. People, this program's been running over well over 5 years, and hundreds of people have designed their lives, with every design being unique. It's what's wonderful for me to sort of see this sort of blossoming of different things. And then for businesses and organizations, that we have a Think Like a Forest program and bespoke programs for businesses and organizations. So you can find it all at the website, which is www.thinklikeatree.co.uk. And you can see the different offerings for individuals, for businesses and organizations, and also things coming up for families. Like I mentioned, the expectant parents, but we also have adolescents program as well coming up. So it's all evolving. And so if you've been to the website before and you haven't looked recently, then please come back and join the email list as well, because that's obviously always the best way to keep in touch.
Fantastic. That's great. I'll make sure there's a link in the description people can find that's really accessible so they can dig in and learn more. So thank you very much for your time. It's been delightful to speak with you.
Yeah, thanks ever so much, Helen.
And thank you for listening to this episode of We Are Carbon. Next time I'll be joined by Richard Dunn to gain some insights about the Harmony Project. This follows on beautifully from the principles we've discussed here with Sarah, but brings the power of a nature-connected approach to our children's education. We discuss the project's ambitions along with its challenges and applications. New episodes are added every other Tuesday, so don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date. And let's keep figuring this all out together.